Greetings and welcome to a brand new episode of Genre Grinder that might remind you of an older episode of Genre Grinder, except for in a different language. Joining me today is returning guest Tyler Foster. Say hello, Tyler.
Hello.
And today we're talking about foreign remakes of Hollywood films. Sometimes I pitch ideas to my friends for episodes, but Tyler always has a bunch of suggestions, and I end up talking him out of the ones that sound too difficult for me. And I want to complain about it, but the Heaven Can Wait episode we did and the Legacy sequel episodes ended up being probably some of the most rewarding for me as a viewer. I don't know if the episodes were as the most rewarding for listeners, but for me, I watched a bunch of stuff that I probably wouldn't have watched otherwise. So,
well, that's nice.
I still trust you somewhat.
Even though I went and I changed some things this time and
changed things around and caused me to have nightmares. Today we're covering a lot of movies, so we need to get into it. But first I'm going to have Tyler explain his thought process in picking this subject, and then I'll explain my arbitrary rules I insisted upon in an effort to narrow it down. So go ahead.
This one, I mean, there wasn't really a whole lot of thought process. I just thought there was a lot of interesting movies in this subgenre, which, like the first two that came to mind that we're going to talk about are the Zhang Yimou remake of Blood Simple, A Woman, a Gun, and a Noodle Shop, and then the Japanese remake of Clint Eastwood's Unforgiven. Just an interesting thing, because, you know, American... like Hollywood remakes a lot of foreign movies, but It seems less common to see it going the other way. But then when you do go the other way, I just find the existence of those movies interesting, because usually, since they're being made for this other country, that we don't necessarily hear about them unless they're like really high profile. Like the Unforgiven one did make some waves into the States, and it played some festivals. I know it played my local festival, the Seattle International Film Festival. But then it's not available on digital over here, and you can't buy it on disc anymore. So it's just like there's this whole little like hidden away, you know, subgenre of movies that are interesting and they exist. And I just thought it would make for good fodder for an episode.
And then the rules I tried to put in, because I started making one of the lists on Letterboxd and it was so out of control, is I decided on one movie per country, because we could have easily just done only Turkish or only Indian in particular. Like there's so many. On Indian alone, there's multiple remakes of a single movie. And there's a lot of really interesting Japanese ones other than Unforgiven. So I instituted that rule. And then this was for my comfort level more than anything. And Tyler was it was also a way of making sure that I didn't have to rewatch or watch other movies for the first time. I tried to pick ones that I knew I was familiar with the original. There was only one I hadn't seen before and one I had to rewatch to kind of jog my memory. And the thing that came up that was kind of funny is that it's actually really hard to do research for this just to get a good group of movies to pull from, because Google just assumes you mean the opposite thing. You type in foreign remakes of Hollywood films and it immediately gives you 7,000 articles about Hollywood remakes of foreign films. And it was actually kind of hard. And I ended up with, and then on top of that, it's hard to find any of these, even with illegal means and all sorts of streaming services. Some of these are really almost impossible to find. So there was a couple we were aiming for that just don't exist, basically.
Yeah, there's the one that you can at least watch a trailer, and even though it's not subtitled, you really get a sense of, like, it's really clear that it's a remake, is the Italian remake of Groundhog Day.
Right, Stork Day, which I did try really hard to find any ways I could find, I could figure out. But yeah, they just, even the DVD doesn't have English subtitles. So even if I wanted to spend exorbitant amount of money to import it, it wasn't going to be very easy to handle. And then the other problem we kept running across is that I knew Tyler wasn't looking for ripoffs or movies that were selling themselves as a remake, or movies that are partially a remake for just because they either run out of original story for themselves, or for instance, there's a lot of Indonesian movies that start as a remake of something and then go off the rails. And then there's a lot of Italian movies that start as something original and then just turn into a remake.
And my
Um,
my main objection to that is just because that's a whole different subgenre unto itself. I mean,
yeah,
like the one that I've seen is that's very famous is Shocking Dark, which is a half Terminator ripoff, half I can't remember.
Aliens. It's
Oh,
Aliens.
Aliens. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny because that director then made a zombie movie that was supposed to be a very late ripoff to the Lucio Fulci zombie movie, and it uses the exact plot. You just aliens are zombies, and the space marines are the Filipino police services. But yeah, another example would be for Italian ones. Luigi Cozzi's Contamination is called a remake of Alien, but it's absolutely not. It's just ripped off some of the designs and the idea of graphic violence and then sold itself as such. And then one movie I watched and Tyler didn't finish, and I agree with him on this, is the Indonesian Rambo alike that was called Rambo or The Intruder, which is really just a movie with a guy who looked like Rambo. Um, there are some similarities, and they rip basically the big thing I can say that since Tyler didn't finish it, the big thing they rip off is the Rambo 2 montage where he's like gearing up,
Mm.
which I suppose means it has as much common with First Blood or Rambo as it does as Hot Shots Part 2 does. So,
That might be
um,
a good way to transition into the one of the first movies because it's sort of on the line
mhm.
between knockoff and remake, although it does pointedly rip off all of the music.
Yes. Yeah, so the first movie here is we're going to call it Black Lightning. It has other titles. It's a Turkish movie, and the original title is Kara Semsik, or Semshik. I'm sorry, I'm not good with Turkish. It's essentially the Turkish version of Rocky,
Hmm.
and the little quick version of why Turkey's so crazy when it comes to this. This is directed by Çetin Inanç. It's hard to research this stuff, but Pete Toombs wrote a book called Mondo Macabro, and there's a 2014 documentary specifically about Turkey called Remake, Remix, Ripoff about copy culture and Turkish pop cinema. That movie was really funny because they don't really cover Black Lightning for more than a second, but there are so few directors who were making these movies in the 60s, 70s, and 80s that they talked to everybody involved in this movie. um, and they said there's one point where the different directors say there's only 36 total stories in the world. They all have a different number, but agree on 36 for some reason. They're not even in the same interview or room when they're being interviewed. And then one guy claims that basically part of the problem was also there were only three guys writing all of these movies into the 80s. And he didn't seem to be joking. Like it didn't seem like he was exaggerating. He would like name the three guys. And so Turkey is known in cult circles and MST3K circles for their shamelessness in ripping movies. As an industry, it developed post World War II, like a lot of these industries did, and it was the fifth biggest film producer worldwide during that period. It was more respected worldwide for its melodramas, but Turkish audiences really like Turkish versions of other countries' movies, so that kept on perpetuating to the point where you have by the time you get to the 80s you have guys who are only doing remakes, and they're particularly schlocky because they're thrown together so quickly by people with subpar equipment and no time to do it, and a lot of them, even if they had skills, and I think that there's a couple moments in this movie that felt like filmmaking skill, but they're so few and far between, and I think it's just because they're like sprinting through everything. The most famous one is the Turkish Star Wars, which
Hmm.
is really called The Man Who Saved the World, and that one's not worth covering because it's really not a remake of Star Wars. It's a completely different movie that just uses Star Wars' music and projects special effects from Star Wars in the background during some scenes. So like they're driving a spaceship, and instead of space behind them, it's literally just scenes from Star Wars behind them.
Well, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, and then home video rentals is the other thing that gets really into it. So, anyway,
It's interesting because you know I've been Vinegar Syndrome puts out a lot through their Picorama label. They put out a lot of adult films, and
Hmm.
I've been watching them. And I just think something about low budget movies like Kara Simsek or Simchek, and these adult films, and then I think the films of like Charles Band. I mean, like surely there is a mercenary element to it where it's like, well, this is a thing that I can do and make some money. But it's also
Hmm.
like, I don't know, it's sort of interesting to see when you see professional actors, it's clear what motivates them. Like there's traditional things that actors or directors they want to create art and stuff like that, but something about seeing the low budget version of that really reminds you that these are just random people, and someone was like, do you want to come try and do this thing that is like a knockoff of Rocky, or is an adult film set in a gym where they're trying to save the gym, or the Charles Band movie that I watched. I don't know if he directed it, but it was no, it was a woman director. But it's like an alien pet shop. It's just like, and you wonder what these people are thinking while they're making it. Like, it just seems so pure, the desire to
Yeah.
just do this thing, to come together to work on this collaborative effort.
Well, that's the value of the 4.5 hours of podcasting that Patrick and I did about the shot on video movies,
Mm,
is trying to figure out that some of them really are just trying to make a quick buck, and those ones end up being the boringest ones, and
hmm
some of them are genuinely awful filmmakers that have so much to say that it makes them I mean, there's some movies that don't function as movies, but are still like they have this outsider artwork kind of quality to them. And I haven't seen that many Turkish movies. I'm not exactly well versed. That's why I was doing a bunch of research. But the ones I've seen have that same, let's do this. Let's and the actors, like you said, the actors clearly are enjoying themselves. A lot of their movies are based on comic books, but like European comic books like Criminal and Diabolic. That kind of superhero stuff really comes through in this movie, I think. And the lead actor, whose name I am now forgetting, this
I looked up the name of the guy, and it's just like I'm not gonna try and
yeah,
say.
Turkish is a hard language, man. Okay, his name is his Kabap Shilar is his
Mm.
last name. Sudar Kabap Shilar. Sudar Kabap Shilar. Yeah. So he's like a guy who's been around for a while, and he has that sort of 80s Hollywood thing where you don't actually need to be a good actor to have a career. Like people always made fun of Arnold as not being a very good actor, but he at least had charisma. There was definitely straight to video equivalents to Arnold Schwarzenegger that were were not were not particularly good at what they were doing. But yeah, so this movie is Rocky, and I think it's a good example of the Z grade Turkish filmmaking because it's so fast paced and crudely edited that it's borderline incoherent. Like it actually kind of, it's hard to describe it. It's almost painful to try to pay attention to it
I mean,
because
it doesn't totally help that the version that we had, the subtitles are very like impressionistic, I guess is the word.
yeah, it was definitely a fan subtitle. I'm pretty sure is what it was, and not a official one.
But I will say that my notes for this one, I mean, it's not that many, but it has the highest number of question marks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would say that if I didn't know this was supposed to be a Rocky riff, I might not have been able to follow it at all, yeah, up to a certain point because there's so much stuff going on. I think that this movie and the other ones I've seen, they have this weird habit of showing us a series of sequences without enough context to understand what's happening, and then later on explaining what we already saw in an exposition sequence. It's a very like reverse way of doing things of what we would normally how we normally would watch a movie from most countries, really. um
The most obvious element that they lifted from Rocky quite faithfully are the montages. I mean, I think
right.
anybody who was making a movie that was inspired or based on Rocky is going to go with the montages, so that's not too surprising.
for each of these, I tried my best to write out some of the major differences between the versions, and this was the hardest one to do. And I guess the biggest problem as far as adapting Rocky goes is that Sidar isn't really an underdog at any point. He's devilishly handsome, and he's righteous by the film's moral standards, and he is borderline superpowered. And the romantic angle really suffers in this regard because it turns Adrian into this sort of rude little sister who's stuck in a one-sided love affair because he's mostly disinterested in her. And I don't know if this was just a weird choice or a way of trying to avoid, I know there were strict censorship laws in Turkey at the time, so maybe they were trying to avoid kissing scenes. I don't know exactly.
I think I gave the movie a little more credit on that front, and I thought it was at least a little interesting that it felt like the end result was flipping the traditional dynamic of Rocky and Adrian, where
Yeah, it does.
Adrian is meek and Rocky is pursuing her.
Yeah, you know what? Well, let's go with that. Let's be nice to the movie. I think that's a good thing.
I noted that the movie also has the waterfront stuff, but now I think our lead character works there, and he seems to have this ongoing beef with one of the employees.
Yes, and I mean it's not just. I think it's his boss. It's a beef with his boss, and it leads to some pretty good, yeah, by their standards, some pretty good action scenes. I would say that better than the boxing scenes. But the boss keeps whipping out this giant like Bowie knife, which might be a reference to Rambo, and and like threatening to kill people. Which I mean, for all I know, in early '80s Turkey, that was what you had to deal with.
I mean, and that's that. I guess that makes more sense that he was the boss because I kept thinking, why does this keep happening?
Yeah, there's. I think that the subtitles say like I'm not paying you to do nothing or something like that. And yeah, and he's also the the best and worst scene in this movie is the training montage, which is set to the Bill Conti music, and that also includes Eye of the Tiger, which would have been what, from the third movie?
Yeah, third movie.
But he's jogging around the pool, and for some reason, he's covered in these mismatched plastic grocery bags, and instead of a sweatsuit. And I guess that would make you sweat, but it's one of the strangest looking things. It just looks like he's a crazy person, and it doesn't have the same like people. I guess it would work for people to chase him since, again, he's not an underdog in this movie. He's basically Rocky from Rocky 2 if Rocky and Rocky 2 had never... Actually, Rocky and Rocky 3 if he hadn't already boxed. Because then there's a very confusing way that they try to make this both Rocky and Rocky 2 and a little bit Rocky 3, where it's his brother that does the first match.
You know, and I mean, you remember I came to you and I was like, is this what happened? Because I can't tell.
It's very hard to tell, but I think it's his brother, and their father is one of their trainers. And instead of Apollo Creed being a sort of the all-American kind of rich guy, popular guy, he seems to be some sort of actual gangster or criminal. Yes. And it's really bizarre because they take the basic plot of Rocky 4, which is that Apollo Creed is killed in the ring and Rocky has to avenge him. But Rocky 4 hadn't been released in Turkey yet. It might not have been even released in the US. I can't find the exact release date. But unless it was released in December of 1985, it seems really unlikely that they even had people in the US that saw this. So either they arrived at the dead brother thing on their own, or, and I think this is what happened, they saw the trailers for Rocky 4 and built their plot around what they thought was going to happen in that movie.
Well, and of course, the brother who dies is not this movie's Apollo Creed. This movie's Apollo Creed is the one who kills him.
Right. So. This movie's Apollo Creed is also this movie's Ivan Drago. And he's also German. This movie has some real major xenophobia going on. Germans and Italians come up a lot, and they call them dirty Germans or dirty Italians.
And I mean, you say the trainer is the dad. I maybe there's a half.
You might.
I had a different I thought there was a different dad. I thought there were, because there's another guy who's generally, like, throughout the whole movie, his costume's exactly the same. So he's got a dress shirt on, he's got a tie. He doesn't have the sport coat, and he seems to have an antagonistic relationship with the protagonist. So he's sort of going around being villainous. He has my favorite line in the whole movie, at least what the subtitles say, which is, "Don't you see? I'm dancing with bitches." Like,
Yeah.
at some point, he takes over this whole club, and our main character comes and confronts him, and that's what he says. And there's also a whole thing, like the brother who dies. He might have been poisoned, I think, because there's
He's sort of poisoned instead of being outclassed.
yeah,
It's not.
somebody put something in his water bottle.
Yeah.
Um, and then there's a thug following the main character around who's dressed like Pee Wee Herman.
Yeah. Well, and then the thing that's really weird is that the final fight is as close as I think it gets to good filmmaking, because there's some sort of impressionistic.
It's not good the way it's made, or exciting, but it's sort of visually interesting. This movie has like two angles for the fight scenes, which is just looking at the whole ring, and then in this last fight there are some interesting like straight on their face as they're getting punched, and
Those are the shots.
and they intercut some of this with the guy that I think is also a dad being murdered.
Yeah, and he gets murdered in the back, so that when our Turkish Rocky wins, he also finds out his dad's just been stabbed to death, and that's how the movie ends. It ends on a downer, and I guess that was they didn't want to end with him losing, like in the original Rocky. They didn't want that kind of downer or something, so they had to like have him win but also lose something out of it. I don't.
And maybe this means end in Turkish, but I laughed out loud because at the very end, which is very abrupt, the word "son" just is on the
Yes, it does mean end in Turkish, but it does look like it's just announcing the son is sad about his dad dying, and then the other trainer basically goes to him and says, "You're my son now," sort of,
Yeah.
And then it says "son," and then that's the end. Yeah, that's a translation issue that becomes very funny in Turkish to English translation. I mean, I guess the other problem with the fighting scenes is that Serdar is clearly very good at most physical feats, but he's actually very bad at boxing. I'm not a boxer or really know anything about boxing, but they have a scene where he's doing the speed bag, and I've seen the speed bag in enough Rocky movies to know when someone's fucking up the speed bag and you should have done another take, because he just is missing it with every hit. I mean, but I think the brawls are actually decent action scenes, and we know that, like Italian movies, that Turkish stuntmen would like basically nearly kill themselves. So it's like they're probably really, really punching each other. It's an entertaining movie, but it is, if you focus too hard, it is sort of like physically painful to endure. It's like it hurts your eyes. Like it's something about it is just so intense and fast moving and loud, and it's like being at a punk rock concert and you're not sure if you really like the band, but you admire their energy.
Speaking of bands, I think I would say that we didn't really work out an order that we're going to go in, but since it's the movie that I have the next least amount of things to say about, maybe we should go to the Purple Rain and its remake.
Well, then we can. Well, usually I do these things in release order.
Release order, okay.
But since you have the least to say about that one, let's go all the way from 1985. Let's zoom all the way to the last movie we covered, which is 2015's, and I'm going to do my best. Akounak, tedalat, taha, tazoughai, which is Niger for rain the color of blue with a little bit of red in it. And this is, I need to make it clear, this is a movie from Niger, not Nigeria. And I might make that mistake as I'm talking about it, because Nigerian and Nigerian sound exactly the same when you say them. And this also means this is not a Nollywood movie, as I misunderstood when I suggested we watch it, because Nollywood is in Nigeria. So Niger is a much smaller much smaller output as far as movies go that make it to other countries, whereas Nigeria makes more movies than like any country in the world, including America. They just throw them out there. So
It's funny that
it's
you had a misconception about this movie, because I also had a misconception about this movie, which is that I thought you, as a Minnesotan and a fan of his music at least, I thought you were a fan of Purple Rain.
well, that's the thing. So I picked this in part because I live in the Twin Cities now. I moved here as a young adult in 2002, but I don't think you're allowed to live here without being excited by Purple Rain, because it was all filmed around here and you can see the play. I've been inside First Avenue a couple times where that takes place, and it looks the same inside these days. So there's like a Minnesota pride to it, and I really do love Prince. But as a movie, Purple Rain is one that I've never really liked that much. I think I like it a little more every time I see it. But who knows how much of that is just because I like recognizing landmarks. I'm pretty big deal. There, any movie that's shot in Tucson, I just lose my shit over. Oh my god, that I know where that corner is.
I'm certainly aware of that, because every time I watch a movie, any movie,
Yeah,
regardless of whether it's being covered on this podcast or not, that's the first thing you want to tell me, is that it was that some part of it was shot in Tucson.
yeah, yeah, because it's important. And someday I'll do an episode on movies shot in the old Pueblo, and I'll have like one of my old Tucson friends do it with me or something. But yeah, I'm not. The thing about Purple Rain is I think that like Rocky, and this might be really controversial for me to say, but I think Rocky is the type of movie that is broad enough story wise. They actually have kind of similar stories in some ways, that it's ripe for remaking and putting your own culture into.
Mm-hmm.
I think it works really well. I think when you take there's one movie on this whole list that I think doesn't work because it changes essential things about it. But most of the movies on this list, including ones I like a lot, I think are really open to interpretation. And so I think a remake of Purple Rain is a really good idea. And I'm surprised they haven't done it. I'm assuming that Prince was against it, as just personally, but that after a while his estate has not been necessarily doing the best things as far as I understand, so there might end up being a remake someday.
Well, I
um,
would my having just watched this movie, my initial reaction to that statement is that the only way you can do a remake of Purple Rain is if you have the rights to the music. Like, I don't nothing against the music in this movie, but it's like the and of course Prince himself, like just the charisma that he had in the
yeah,
movie. It's just like those the music and his charisma are basically the engine for Purple Rain, and it's kind of like you take those things out of it, and it's hard to imagine. It's hard to see what there is left.
yeah, you would, I mean, there's not a lot. I can't think of any modern people with that level
Mm-hmm.
of impact. I don't listen to a lot of modern music though, so don't take my advice on that one, but it's just because I'm old. But yeah, it is a lot of it, and that is a problem that I'm just going to call it Nigerian Purple Rain from now here on out, so I don't have to struggle. I should say this is the world's first Tuareg language fiction film, which explains the title "Rain with the color blue with a little bit of purple or a little bit of red in it," because there's no Tuareg word for purple,
Huh.
which is kind of interesting. You don't think about colors being a language barrier. It's kind of cool, I think. So I'm going to give the Tuareg thing. I'm going to give the bare bones Cliff's Notes version that I got off Wikipedia about Tuareg culture. It was a nomadic culture that was forced to change following a drought in 1973. They had to relocate into urban areas, and their marginalized youth began to develop into like, you know, what happens, like you get punk rockers or hip hop artists, like there develops a marginalized youth group, develops their own culture, and a lot of young men ended up employed by Libyan military leader Muammar al-Gaddafi. So they were exposed to revolutionary ideas from Gaddafi's people and then popular music, and they developed their own sort of guitar-based folk rock music that is really hard to describe without hearing it. It's got a very African rhythm to it, but then the guitar kind of just solos, like bluesy solo, a little bit kind of fast bluesy solo over an African beat. It's almost difficult to recognize repeating motifs. It really feels a lot like a jam session. And for me, it's very similar to the movie The Harder They Come, which is about reggae music and its similar radical political themes throughout history, and the way that those things, reggae fused from rock and blues and Middle Eastern music and African music. It's a sort of similar thing, but it's just a less developed musical style right now because it's only been around since the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
Or not even that. I think they said it didn't start until the late 70s. And so the thing this movie does that's interesting is, instead of hiring a Niger actor to play Prince, or the kid who is Prince's character, they build a Purple Rain like movie around an existing Tuareg star whose name is another thing I'm going to end up messing up, but okay, his name is Mdou Mokhtar. He actually has much more of a Jimi Hendrix vibe to him than a Prince vibe. And he lists Hendrix as one of his idols. And I mean, I guess some people might still to this day not know how great of a guitarist Prince was, but Prince was more, pop musician than Jimi Hendrix.
Mm-hmm.
I think that what you said, you just watched this just before we started recording.
Yeah.
And it's definitely a very mellow movie.
It's mellow, and then the original Purple Rain is 2 hours long, and this one's an hour and 14 minutes. I mean, a lot of these foreign movies are shorter than American movies, but I think in this case it's also because they chopped out like a good third, maybe even half of the plot. Like there is an analog for Apollonia, but it's not really.
She's not a musician herself. She's not a lesson he has to learn about sharing, basically.
They've given those plot points to our protagonist, and then also they heavily altered the relationship with the father. I mean, the basic elements are still there, but he doesn't, unless I missed it, he doesn't have a wife in this one.
No, she's in a couple scenes. There's both a father and a mother, and the mother has one scene where she tells him why his father, because instead of his father just being an abusive drunk, he just doesn't like the rock culture, basically. And he's in the Prince movie, the father dies, and then Prince finds his music, and he discovers that he had he had a career, like he wanted to be a musician and couldn't make it, and so I just
rewatched Purple Rain as well. Doesn't he shoots himself in the head, but
yeah,
my recollection is that he's still in the hospital at the end.
Oh, does he survive? See, I forgot that then. See, that's why I should have
his head is all bandaged up, and his wife is like lying on him and stuff. I mean, maybe he dies, but I don't think he does.
He is at least out of the picture where nothing bad happens to
The rest of it is right. He finds all the sheet music in the house.
And instead of sheet music, his dad used to write poetry. And so he uses it for lyrics. And a fun note, it's Mokhtar's real life dad playing his dad, which I thought was cute.
I did find it very funny when Mokhtar comes home and his dad's like, I won't have a guitarist in this house. Like, the most shameful thing that could possibly happen, because his dad is like literally burning his guitar. He's made a little pyre out of it.
Yeah, it's just it's more like a Dirty Dancing, or not Dirty Dancing, Dirty Dancing or Flash. Damn it, what's the other one? Dirty Dancing, Flashdance, and Footloose. It's more of a Footloose situation where it's just culturally not cool with his dad. But it ends with him having his big final concert, and his dad literally comes in and approves of it, and someone says, "Wow, your son's great," and so he feels good about himself at the end. And yeah, the Apollonia character is maybe the most natural actor in the whole movie. It is an interesting dynamic where there are no professional actors, as far as I can tell, in the movie, and so it does give it a sort of that, and the style give it a sort of almost documentary slice of life thing. And I think those are the parts I like the best, when it was just sort of following around day-to-day life for these people and the way they jam together and stuff. It's almost like the prince parts get in the way, sort of.
There's also an interesting like running subplot about the fact that he's left-handed.
Yeah, well, and that I think that is a Jimi Hendrix thing, because there's stories about Hendrix struggling when he first learned guitar, because he's left-handed, and guitars are just designed for right-handed people, and it's more expensive to get a left-handed one.
There's one part where there's this guy who's like picking on him, and he's playing his music right-handed.
Mm-hmm.
He's like getting upset about it.
And that's the closest this gets to having a what's his name in the time as
Morris
the villain.
Day.
Yeah, that's the closest they get to a Morris Day character. It's not really the same. I mean, the thing that makes it's the opposite. It's the opposite problem than Black Lightning had, where they take a story that's essentially not an underdog story. Purple Rain, in Purple Rain, the kid is already top of the pops here in Minnesota, and his problem is that his attitude and personality and home life and all this stuff is going to lose him his top slot to the actual underdog, who is Morris Day in the time. And I feel like it's an interesting thing about that movie, that any other movie would have made them the protagonists and Prince the bad guy. So this one makes him a total underdog who has hardly anybody knows about his stuff. There's a really interesting thing to me where the way that the music is passed around is people record it live on their phones and then make recordings of that.
Yeah, people are just like, I heard your music on my phone.
On my phone, and I thought that kind of stuff was really cool. The huge differences between like the Minneapolis area, which is a oldish city built up iron and concrete that's meant to take sub-zero temperatures and hundreds of feet of snow, versus a small community with mostly adobe style buildings and most things made to be outside on purpose. So like their version of First Ave is mostly an outdoor venue with some walls. That kind of stuff I thought was kind of cool, because it really shows an actual cultural difference, which is something I was looking for in this particular exercise, as I wanted to see cultural differences. Well, and one other issue I have is that I think that part of the appeal of Purple Rain is that the kid is kind of a jerk and has to get over himself for the plot to move forward. And the whole Purple Rain sequence is really about giving himself up, giving himself into his friend's riff, his dad's music, everything, and letting other people help him and be part of their lives and that kind of stuff. And that's not really here. This is an underdog story about a guy who is an underdog who works his way up to getting the big show, and now everybody loves him, which is a much more common type of movie. Let's wind it back to 1999 and Tanuja Chandra's Sangharsh, which is the Indian Silence of the Lambs. So if you're
this doing was one of your picks.
Yeah, this is one of my picks. I had already seen this movie, but this is the Indian Silence of the Lambs, and the title really it translates, depending on which version, to conflict or struggle. And the quick version of India's remix culture is it's another country that it really makes a lot of unofficial Hollywood remakes, but it's such a huge industry that these movies really make a small fraction of the output. They just end up being a lot of what we see because cult audiences like the idea of the Indian version of Dracula, or there's an Indian version of Betsy and I covered a movie that was a almost 3-hour long musical version of Quitters Inc., the Stephen King short story for the movie Cat's Eye, which is part of a 3-part anthology in that case. So it's like a 20-minute film being stretched out into almost 3 hours. There's a Bollywood remake of Lucio Fulci's lowest keyest giallo thriller, The Psychic. Like, I mean, there's something for everyone, and that's what we like out here. But romance movies and musical romances are the big thing now. They're making more movies, like, because RRR was a hit here, and before that there was lots of streaming hits of those big boisterous silly special effects and action movies. That's pretty new though.
And romance and musical is definitely the thing that they injected into Silence.
Yeah. So take Silence of the Lambs and make it a romantic musical, and you got Sangharsh. I actually really like this movie, but it's it's definitely there's some cultural barriers when it comes to watching it. And I should point out that I really don't know Indian cinema very well. I am one of those people who mostly watches a specific genre. I watch horror movies. Most of my Indian industry knowledge comes from horror movies, and most of those are pretty old at this point. So I might be saying stupid shit during this one, but this is sort of just my point of view on the idea. The director claims that this was actually based on a real life case.
I mean, I guess I can see that, although it is unambiguously Silence of the Lambs.
It's pretty unambiguously Silence of the Lambs, but she claims that it has stuff in common, but it was really based on some real things. In her defense, Buffalo Bill in Silence of the Lambs is based on like 4 different real life serial killers. So, there is a certain thing about serial killer culture, especially in the 90s, that we all kind of saw them as the same guy over and over again. So there's stuff.
I mean, I do wonder, it could go both ways, because it's like, you could say, because it's like, famously, the same serial killer inspired Silence of the Lambs, Psycho, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Yeah.
So
and those movies are vastly different movies. So yes. And then the actual guy was kind of not like any of them either.
So you sort of think, if you wanted to reverse engineer, if she wanted to come up with a thing and say it's based on a serial killer, you don't have to look very hard to figure out how to sort of stretch some serial killer into the one in this movie.
Yeah. She also directed a lot of television, and she has a rape revenge movie that she made called Dushman, which means enemy. So she's mostly, from what I understand, she's known for doing, for lack of a better term, strong female thrillers with strong female leads.
Which is
sort
of funny, because one of the most prominent things I felt watching this one is how much they took away from its Clarice analog.
Yeah, I mean this is one of the ones where the differences are really what makes the difference. That doesn't sound right. The differences are what makes it an entertaining and interesting movie. Is it's more about slotting in your memories of Silence of the Lambs than it is just watching Silence of the Lambs in a different language, which is or cut too fast, like the Turkish movie. It's just like a crazy version of Rocky. This is like, well, we're going to take Silence of the Lambs and we're just going to slot in stuff. So,
I mean, it's, when we're talking about romance and musical, it's like almost all the changes are designed to accommodate that. Like the first and most obvious one to me was they didn't make their Hannibal Lecter into a cannibal. He basically didn't do anything wrong. He's just like, he worked for criminals, and he's really smart.
He's really smart, and he's also like a man of the people. He gives her lectures about corruption and capitalism and stuff like that. Like he's handsome too. But
he looks like a South Asian Bradley Cooper, really.
Yeah. And they also give her a guy, the one character that doesn't have an analog in the Demi movie.
Yeah, she has a dopey boyfriend.
Yeah, he's actually more like a guy who wants to be. He's like a platonic friend that wants to be her boyfriend, and his name's Ahmet, and I think Ahmet is there in an effort to do a love triangle that they then sort of abandon early in the movie, because I think they knew better than to do a love triangle between her, Lecter, and the police chief. They probably realized that would be weird, because that guy really has to be sort of her father figure for the story to work.
Right.
And her name is Reet. And the subtitles, the junky subtitles I had kept on changing it. I don't know if you noticed that. They would spell
Yes.
Reet like 4 different ways. And the Hannibal Lecter is Aman. And that is, I mean, it begins similar to Silence of the Lambs with her running.
I mean, the thing, it made me laugh right off the bat, because it's like, what's the most like the training forest next to Quantico? How about the Arc de Triomphe?
Yes. And then she's a lot more her little run, she's a lot more patriotic. Like you get the sense of weight on Clarice's shoulders of this lot she's chosen in life, where Reed's sort of like is saluting the flag and really feeling it.
Yeah, she's like crying at this point.
So yeah, so the main changes that they make Reet and Hannibal an item sort of, and it for a while it feels like a totally different movie with all the other stuff, but then as soon as they get to the two of them meeting, they shoot it almost identical to the way it's shot in Silence of the Lambs, minus Multiple Megs throwing sperm on her face.
There's a guy in another cell who just grabs her, but
yeah.
It's another thing that amused me is like the reasoning like her boss gives her for choosing is like, you got to be passionate about what you do, and she says, "I hate crime." That made me laugh a lot. But yeah,
really does.
Most of the scenes that are very similar are the ones with her and our Lecter analog in the jail. He even draws pictures like Lecter.
Yeah, like Lecter does. And instead of supplying her or providing her clues as to the killer's psychological profile, he's connecting elements outside of so he has connections to criminal empires.
Yeah, you don't remember the part in Silence of the Lambs where Lecter was like, "Someone will visit you in your hotel room," and then a kid with no legs shows up.
Yes, yeah. I mean, it's pretty much identical. Yeah, mostly he just shouts his political perspective at her during their early meetings. Yeah, I can't find much information about the writing of the movie that's in English. I found a lot of stuff that's not in English, but it is possible that they reached into the romantic angle because they had read the book Hannibal, which wasn't
that was my thought too. But then, just as we started doing this right now, I thought, oh yeah, but then Hannibal the movie doesn't come out until 2001. So
right.
I don't know. I mean, the book was maybe out by 1999. I don't know, but
yeah, it was. But
okay,
who knows if there was a Hindi version of it or whatever. Mm-hmm. I think they just did it, but there is some sort of. It's funny too because the book has much more explicitly a romance between. I shouldn't say explicitly like there's sex scenes, but like it's not just a sort of like Hannibal Lecter and Clarice have a weird platonic pseudo romantic pseudo mother or father daughter, like their relationship is really nebulous. And the book did famously end with them turning it romantic, and people fucking hated it, so they deleted that from the Ridley Scott movie and didn't have her run away with him.
I mean, they may have deleted it from the Ridley Scott movie, like the ending, but the Ridley Scott movie definitely way more than the Silence of the Lambs leans into that aspect of it.
Yeah, but it was more so than that. So people just didn't like it. So the other thing that's changed for the area is the killer. He is a religious fanatic who sacrifices children to Kali, not a pseudo trans serial killer.
Although they did have him dress up as a woman for his introduction.
They did, and he a couple times. And what's funny is that introduction scene. There's an introduction to him where they try to set a sting for him. It is so close to the sting scene from Hannibal, where they try to capture the woman, the drug dealer woman. Mm-hmm. And so that was interesting because that movie definitely hadn't come out, so they just sort of arrived at a similar sequence. But yeah, he dresses in women's clothing, but it feels more like a horror movie thing, like an Uncanny Valley thing. Like you weren't ready that was actually your killer in what he was wearing. It feels less trans panicky, I think, than Silence of the Lambs did. It feels more like it's just supposed to be like this, like a shock that the face behind that you think you're looking at an old woman, and suddenly it's a very powerful man who almost murders everybody. He's actually very powerful in a way that Hannibal Lecter is not. Hannibal Lecter is clever, or I guess Buffalo Bill isn't at all clever or powerful.
He's a little clever. I mean,
he's a little clever.
They have the scene where he captures the the woman from Grey's Anatomy, and
Oh yeah.
based
So
on
he has plans,
Bundy, I think.
but he doesn't have the power to like take a bullet and keep fighting. He
Right.
um
The subterfuge with the woman's clothing would probably have been more convincing if he isn't just doing a voice. That part kind
yeah.
of gave it away, but yeah. And then there's like by this point we've already had our first musical number, which is a whole fantasy thing where she's on the phone waiting for the guy that Lecter's going to send to her hotel room, and her boyfriend's like, or her would-be boyfriend is like singing to her and stuff like that.
And she's picturing the Hannibal guy instead of him, and
Yeah.
it's, I mean, it's a well done sequence. It just feels a little wrong in the context of Silence of the Lambs to have her, I mean, I guess having her obsessed with him doesn't feel wrong, but having her romantically obsessed with him feels a little off.
I mean, they certainly, by the end of the movie, they've really transformed the character to the point where it's kind of like you sort of get it. Like, you know, they've really worked their way around all of the bad. Like, he hasn't really done anything that bad. So,
Yeah.
and they sort of emphasize that as the movie goes on.
Yeah. And he's a generally a good person. There, I mean, the other musical things, if for some reason you're listening to this and you're saying I'm not going to watch a musical, there's basically, it's not, other than the scene that Tyler just described, there's not a lot of stopping for the characters to sing type music. The most common thing is that there's this song that I believe the actor who plays Amon is singing, but I'm not positive if he's actually singing it. That's just sort of his internal thoughts about things, that plays over sort of montages of what's going on with the characters.
And then there are a couple scenes where within the world of the movie, there is a performance.
Yeah, there's big performance things that's like, I don't know, whatever the Indian equivalent to Mardi Gras or Carnival is. And they use it as a means to sneak. Because at this point, Amon has escaped, and instead of in Silence of the Lambs, where he just leaves, he wants to help his version of Clarice. And so the two of them are running away together, away from the police. And I think it's another really particularly good scene where it's like a street scene and they have a whole musical bit, and he ends up dressed as a clown.
No, he's dressed as Zorro.
Oh, that's right, Zorro. But but doesn't he end up in clown makeup like between shots, and then he has the police at gunpoint?
Another clown, like
It's just a different guy.
I think there's a different guy. Yeah,
Because he has a whole group of minions that are helping out with everything.
Yeah, it's like a band that's in the hotel room, like next to our Clarice character, and they're like, she just like after she's met him for the first time, she goes home and they're already over there playing, and she said waves hello, and then after the Lecter analog has made his escape, and it's like it's funny because it's like it really is exactly like in the original, which is kind of a weird choice at this point since he's supposed to be a good guy, where he doesn't wear the guy's face, but he does pretend to be dead, and he gets taken out in the hospital, like on the hospital gurney, and he escapes in the ambulance, which presumably crashes, and then like they're just on. He's with the Clarice character Wreath, and the band just offers to help for some reason.
Yeah.
And then there's this whole dance sequence. She's dressed up like, I mean, presumably the Catherine Zeta-Jones character from
Oh
Zorro.
yeah, that's true.
That would be the contemporary version of Zorro at that point.
Yeah.
And it's just like this wacky number where the police are trying to arrest her because they think she's involved, like she helped him escape. And then he's like, she's literally dancing in front of them, and they're just standing there like with the handcuffs in hand, but they don't do anything because it's the middle of a musical number.
I have a note here that I almost forgot about. During that scene you're describing, that's their version of the Lecter escaping scene. He picks up one of the guards and breaks him over his knee like Bane and Batman.
And then, of course, the thing that I loved, which is that the romance has developed at this point to the degree where he has just decided to write the word love in blood on his shirt, like an emo teenager. That made me laugh a lot.
It was like he's like an emo teenager superhero with that's his Superman crest. And then okay, another really big change is that they actually fill out Reed's backstory a lot differently. She's it's actually darker than I would say Clarice is, whereas Clarice is dealing with Oh, now I can't remember. Is Clarice's father dead, or did her parents? Her
Your
father's dead.
your father's dead. Her father died in the line of duty. He was a cop.
Yeah. Instead of dying in the line of duty as a cop, her brother had joined up with a revolutionary group and was murdered in front of her by authorities.
And of course, I mean, they her father being dead is sad, but it's not the traumatic thing for her. The traumatic thing for her is the screaming of the lambs that happens after that gives the movie the title.
Right.
In this case, it would be so that's really what they're replacing here is the brother dying is the equivalent to the screaming of the lambs stuff.
Right. And so it's it's an even more traumatic event overall, and so that's kind of interesting, and they do a good job. They actually show parts of it, whereas in Silence of the Lambs we hear. That's actually going to come up later in the next thing we're going to talk about, but instead of hearing Clarice talk about it and the camera focusing on her face and what she's saying to Lecter, we see these scenes throughout the movie as if it's a repressed memory that she's trying to get back again.
And it ties into this ongoing theme throughout the movie about the dark and the light. Like her grandmother gives her a flashlight at the beginning of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
so that she has something to see through the dark with, and it's like that's sort of the dramatic arc of her character is like seeing through the dark. The one part of this movie that I wasn't a huge fan of was the extremely extended ending, which is like a whole action sequence that involves both the Clarice and the Lecter character and the confronting the bad guy in this big drawn out brawl inside a cave.
I mean, it's an okay action scene, but it's sort of like the movie needs to be over a while ago. That happens, where you'll have a good scene that you probably should have cut out anyway.
Mm-hmm.
I have a couple other little kind of not random notes here. And a funny coincidence, this movie also steals Bill Conti's Rocky theme, but
Yes.
it's for an incidental shot of a marching band playing in a park festival. It's not used. It's not. I can't remember the difference between diegetic and non-diegetic. It is diegetic.
Yes.
It is a diegetic thing where it's supposed to be a marching band, but the recording is 100% the Bill Conti Rocky theme,
straight out of the movie.
And one touch I liked that they stuck to is there's a point where Aman notices Reet is originally a Punjab speaker, which I think is a reference to the fact that Lecter is recognizing Clarice's West Virginia drawl. I like that they found a way of working accents into it. Because again, as someone who only speaks one language, I don't think about that very often, which is very selfish, self-centered of me. But I don't think about the fact that other languages have accents to them that are within that, like not just like me speaking Indian would have a horrible American accent to it, but like people within India have several different accents. Same way people in America have several different accents. I like that. I thought that was a good touch.
Mm-hmm.
And then the only other note I have is I suspect, but do not know, that the religious baby killing fanatic angle was probably culturally insensitive.
I mean, he certainly looks like super crazy.
But yeah, I don't have anything else about this. I think it's a cool movie, but it's too bad it's not really easy to watch. You have to legally download it and then hope the subtitles work. If we're going in order, the next one would be 12 or Dvinst. Oh God, Devanstat. Devansat.
This is one that I picked. I reviewed it for DVD Talk a long time ago on DVD, and at the time, I don't think I had definitely seen 12 Angry Men. This is a remake of 12 Angry Men in Russian, and I had seen 12 Angry Men, but I don't think I had watched it recently, and so it's been. I mean, it's probably been since 2007 that I actually watched it, maybe 2008, and but I had always remembered it fairly fondly, so I thought of it for this, and in recent years I have rewatched 12 Angry Men a couple of times, so I have a much better understanding of that movie or memory of that movie, and so it was interesting to revisit this one in that context.
And this was one I watched more recently than the other ones because we kind of added this one after we had to delete Rambo.
Mm-hmm.
It's directed by Nikita Mikhalkov, who is, I don't know much about modern Russian cinema, but he's kind of a big deal. He had a movie called Dark Eyes in '87, which starred Marcello Mastroianni, and that got Mastroianni an Academy Award nomination for Best Actor. And then he directed a 1992 movie called Close to Eden that was nominated for Best Foreign Film at the Academy Awards, as well as a movie called Burnt by the Sun, which won the award. So he is a big deal, continuing to work filmmaker. And he is also a Russian nationalist, self-described monarchist who supports the orthodoxy and who made post-Soviet propaganda, and who is a strong vocal supporter of Vladimir Putin and the current invasion of the Ukraine.
Yeah, so there were definitely some elements to this that had that. I mean, I would say that it's not that strong in this movie. Like, I mean, I did read on Wikipedia after rewatching it that Vladimir Putin saw this movie and like cried.
Yeah.
Which is kind of like, okay. I mean, I think the main thing that makes it work is just that is the same thing that makes 12 Angry Men work, which is just that it's in terms of being a performance piece, you really just can't beat it. It gives a lot of people a lot of good material to work with, and their interplay and their dynamics. Like I just read recently that apparently 12 Angry Men is like huge on TikTok. Like the kids today, they love 12 Angry Men.
Oh, I've been seeing TikToks actually. I watched those compilations of TikToks on YouTube sometimes. Mm-hmm. And the knife scene is actually, it's been on TikToks lately.
And so I just think that there is a fundamental, like very stagey, it's like, of course, this was adapted from like I think it was it a radio play first, and then it was a TV movie, and then it was
it was a pretty big deal stage play.
Okay.
Too. Yeah.
And so, I just think the same elements that make 12 Angry Men work, even if this thing hadn't, and it does, hew fairly closely in a lot of ways to the original movie. Like, they don't make the core debates between the jurors are basically the same. They have the duplicate knife. They have the like they recreate the apartments and time the walk and things like that. So there's a lot of things that are the same, but I mean, this one does change a lot of the character motivations. There's some other little details that I thought were different in interesting ways, but I mean, just the basic core thing that works about 12 Angry Men, I think works about this movie, which is it's just fun to watch these actors like really going at it.
Well, and I'm going to call this 12, not Devanstat, which I can't do Russian. The Putin oppositionalists apparently considered this a pro-Putin movie. And if had I not known that or anything about this guy's backstory, I do think that the general message is generic enough that it's hard for someone who's not involved in Russian politics to read this as a particularly right-wing movie.
I mean, I do see it.
Yes, after it's pointed out, you can see it.
I mean, I don't, and I think I know probably less about Russian politics than you do. I mean, my main takeaway is that the guy who got killed, the father figure, is in this movie. He is a Russian soldier, and I think just like the original movie has elements of like they bring in racial discrimination into the debate basically, and I think that there's an element of that here, but basically the big change that I noticed that I think hints at the movie's political direction is basically the idea that this guy is this kid who's on trial. In the end, because he's not guilty, that makes him a quote unquote good Russian. Like he's a good citizen, and they that is one of the big changes. Is that I mean, at least again, not knowing exactly how what all it means politically, and that I could have a totally different opinion if I were more up on Russian politics. But I do like the idea that they are concerned about what will happen to the kid if they let him off, just because whoever put him in this position could be gunning for his life. And they're like, if we let him go free, the same guys who framed him for this crime might come and kill him. And I think that there's probably a lot of additional layers to that aspect of it that are maybe not great.
Well, okay, so for me, I'm familiar with the original film very well. This is the one I was talking about earlier. This is like one, I think 12 Angry Men is one fundamentally great movie, like that people should understand and have
Mhm.
seen like once. Like I don't say that about a lot of movies. I love Silence of the Lambs, but if you don't want to watch Silence of the Lambs, that's cool. Whatever. I don't give a shit. but but I think that this is important to understand movie, and it has been remade so many times because of that and what it represents. And its politics are, it's considered one of the essential anti um McCarthyism movies, along with like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and High Noon.
Mm.
But like those movies, its metaphor is open enough that it can be switched and you can make it about something else. In this case, I think that the real ideology, this is the ideological thing that is that for most of what I remember of Putin's reign, especially in the 2000s when he started invading places, and this takes place. This was actually made during the insurgency period of the Second Chechenian Russian War,
Hmm.
which is, I think, the first in line. It was that, and then Crimea, and then Georgia. I might have those two switched, and now it's Ukraine. Um, so it was still a pretty big thing, and they still would have needed to develop propaganda to support it because it probably would have been seen as pretty bad. But I think that part of what the Putin, this is getting way more political than I mean it to be because I just don't understand the politics. But I think the Putin's people have demonstrated that they're very good about taking something like racism or anti-Semitism and making it sound like it's the reason they're doing something. So the whole Ukraine thing has been them saying we're fighting anti-Semitism and Nazis, and because there are anti-Semites and Nazis in the Ukraine, they can use that as an excuse, even though it's not really why they're doing this. And so I think that this is a case of co-opting anti like second time anti-Semitism and anti-culturalism, xenophobia in general, anti-xenophobia. They're making their argument sound logical by co-opting a logical argument, even if it's not really the reason they're doing it, because it's really about
Because
taking control.
certainly the characters in the movie have conversations that I would that if I weren't if you hadn't brought this up, like the fact that this is a pro Putin movie or that people thought of it that way, like I would listen to the way the characters speak in the movie and think that they were arguing against xenophobia.
Exactly.
Yeah, like they sound like, because like there's this character who's like, he's part of a traveling theater troupe and he has a good speech about like cops shooting people in the streets and stuff like that. It sounds like the kind of thing that you would want to agree with. And then there's some guy has some anti-Jewish remarks, and a guy like claps back at that. And then there's one character in the movie who's ranting about Chechen people in a way that sounds racist, and you like that you should side against this guy. So
Right.
and
Right.
it all sounds like it makes sense to me as someone who doesn't have the context that would allow me to understand what it might actually mean.
Yeah. And that's the reason why I think it's perfectly okay for people to watch and enjoy this movie. I think that it is purposely made in a way that its political messaging is so broad that it's kind of something we can all agree on. And even if it has, I mean, there's also little things like the only soldiers we really see in the flashbacks are the bad Chechnyan soldiers,
Mm-hmm.
the Chechnyan rebels that are the insurgency at this point.
Mm-hmm.
We barely see the Russian soldiers, and when we do, there's only one scene where they're being particularly violent,
Mm-hmm.
and it's out of misunderstanding. And for the most part, they're either literally off screen or dead.
Mm-hmm.
So that's another way of kind of, yeah. And I mean, the original movie is an anti-lynch mob movie, and you can recontextualize, like witch hunts. You can recontextualize a lynch mob to mean whatever the fuck you want it to mean. I mean, that's what the political right does on most countries these days, is refers that's what woke is about witch hunts and lynch mobs. But
Exactly.
so yeah, so that's the basic political surrounding this. And so for me, I thought this was unreasonably long.
Yeah,
It's about 2 hours and 40 minutes, and the original movie is 96 minutes.
I can't argue against that. I mean, I personally didn't find it to be like that slow or anything. Like for what it is, it's paced pretty well. But I certainly, just based on that information alone, it's like there's no real argument that I can make that says it has to be this long. You could definitely trim some of the character stuff out of it, and even if I thought that character stuff was good, you would still have a good movie. It does start to feel at a certain point, even though I like all of the monologues, that it's just like a sort of a revolving door where everyone gets to have a monologue.
Right.
One of the better monologues is like comes right near the end, and it's not really one from the original movie because
No. It's one of the biggest changes, actually.
and that was, I mean, certainly something that I thought was really good because it seemed like because the movie, like I said, it doesn't make that many. It certainly localizes the story, but it doesn't make that many deviations from the original movie, and so that one was really striking to me.
I have to admit there was a part where they started this sort of new ending, and I really thought it might go somewhere else, and I was about to hate the entire movie. Because what they do is they have the one juror who is acting as foreman, who in the original story has the least input. He really just wants to kind of be foreman and take votes. And suddenly that character has an objection to the whole thing because he agrees that the kid's innocent, but he's afraid that putting him back out on the street will be worse than putting him in jail because someone will kill him or he'll go and try to get revenge for his father's death. And so I thought that they were literally going to end it that way and decide that was the better thing. I was really scared for a second. They're like, oh, no. We're not going to say we put these people in prison because it's safer for them, are they? But no, that's not where they go. They have this whole nice long discussion about taking responsibility for a jury taking responsibility for the people they freed. Which is a great statement. Like, no matter what your political ideology, taking responsibility for other people and helping them instead of just ending your entire interaction with them at the end of the day and vote. I found it a little annoying because I like the way the original ends with them leaving and us knowing that they found him not guilty, but not knowing the rest of the story. I like that. I feel like that's a really solid end. But it is, by the time you get to the end of this movie, which I was really, it was starting to grind on me after a while, but it is an okay way to end it. They've had me for 2.5 hours at that point, the extra 10 minutes to actually make a change to the story. I think it works. I think that's fair to leave in.
That's funny because I actually realized in the middle of you saying that you and I are talking about different things. I mean, the thing that I was talking about, the thing that I really liked is that because in the Henry Fonda version, it's like the Lee J. Cobb character. We're boiling the whole
the
movie.
Racist.
Yeah, well, yeah, we're boiling up to this big like snapping point, and in this one, the guy gets to have like he really digs into the whole backstory of what happened, and I found that scene very good. I really like that.
Yeah, that is nice because in the original, it's just that Peter Fonda figures out what's going on and voices it and says, "Oh, you see this kid as your kid." You're right. That is another difference that I liked. I'll get the mean stuff out of the way. It feels really long to me. And I think that the early scenes are especially it feels like endless scenes of old guys putzing and explaining their personal backstories, and it feels weirdly enough, it feels more like a stage play than the original stage play. But to me, it is tonally in the antithesis of Lumit's movie, which is just so perfectly cut to everything we exactly need to know about these people, and leaving a lot of it anonymous because they are supposed to represent everyone, not all of us, but all white men of a certain age who might be on a jury in the 1950s.
In terms of things that I think that they could probably get rid of without, I mean, certainly some of that beginning stuff. Another little thing that they've added that I just don't really, I don't have anything against it, but it doesn't seem to add anything. Is that the chambers that they're supposed to be in are not finished, so they're in a high school gym, and there's a bird in the gym, and there's just a lot of stuff, a lot of business with this bird that's CGI, and it's just like I don't really know. Like,
I'm pretty sure the bird's God. I'm not kidding. The way the movie ends,
because the one guy, the Peter Fonda version, like the character,
Juror 8,
yeah, he has a little picture that we don't see for the entire movie. It's like a big reveal that it's a little religious image. And
it's a Virgin Mary, which is very orthodox
Mhm.
thing to do.
Like he puts it off to the side at the beginning, and then he comes back at the end in an additional scene that you could get rid of just to retrieve it, and then he like lets the bird out, and the bird like lands next to the picture meaningfully. So I see where you're coming from with that.
I think the bird is God, and Christine said, "Is this guy supposed to be Mary Poppins of juries?" Which was kind of a good. He is a little like an angel at the end. Like I fixed it, God. We did it right.
I did like that he was a little less. Because I do it's not a problem with the movie, but I do watch the original 12 Angry Men and feel like the Henry Fonda character sort of has an agenda. He's a little more driven than this character. I like that
this guy is very nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, you get the feeling Fonda might stab someone a couple times. The other really fun change, which is a nod to the audience, is the knife scene. He can't find in the original movie. It's a big bam reveal where I got the same knife.
Mm-hmm.
Where anybody who's seen their play or original movie knows that reveal is coming,
mm-hmm.
and he can't get his suitcase unlocked, and so it creates this. It creates a little silly suspense moment that I thought was really cute and a really fun way to nod to the audience and say, yeah, you think you know what's coming up, but what if he can't get it open? What if he can't make this point? What's going to happen? I like that a lot.
There's also it's sort of an exaggerated, or that's not the word I'm looking for. Beleaguered, I guess it's close. That's still not the right one, but a metaphor about the I guess the HVAC system inside the gym. And then the power keeps going out. That's another thing that just doesn't seem like really adds anything.
But to me, that felt like it was really meaningful to the director. Like, I'm wondering if he had an axe to grind about infrastructure or something, because that really did. That felt like that of all the things in this movie, if I would have watched it blind, I would have thought that had some major political meaning. How often it comes up, but I don't know what it is.
I mean, I do think it fits really nicely with the thing at the end where they're like, it's going to take, like, just look at that. It's going to take 40 years for them to do anything. So, I thought that part of it was nice, but that's not worth all the rest of the stuff.
And I think if you cut out a lot of the stuff at the beginning, then all the expanded role playing they do in the gym, which the gym offers them a larger space to sort of role play the events.
Mm-hmm.
I think that stuff's pretty good, and I think it would feel less extraneous if it happened an hour and a half into the movie instead of 2 hours into the movie. Also,
the other major addition to the movie, which is probably another place where you could do a lot of cutting, is that they just have footage that's from other things that happened outside the courtroom. They cut to the kid a lot. I could probably do without any of those. I don't really care what he's doing.
We don't see the kid at all, I think. Well, maybe we see him once in. I don't think we see him at all in the Lumet version. We just hear him. They don't even explicitly say what his race is in the Lumet version. I think they had to tiptoe around that.
Yeah,
I think they referred to him as Spanish at one point, but it's mostly like saying them.
Yeah,
those kind. Then that was kind of an interesting thing for me to realize that, like, I grew up in America, and so I'm used to racism being based on the color of your skin. I forget that in other cultures, like in Russia, where everybody looks generally the same, it's all cultural based xenophobia, and so the guy next to you could actually be Jewish or Chechnyan, and you wouldn't know it, like, because that's the thing that keeps happening is people keep saying, well, I'm Jewish, why are you talking shit about Jewish people? Or I'm from the Caucasus, why are you talking shit about people from the Caucasus? That was an interesting cultural bit. When I keep saying I keep looking for cultural changes, I like that a lot. That was neat.
Yeah, I mean, and in general, that is probably the primary thing that is interesting about watching these movies, is when they do really localize and root it in some sort of local culture that is not present in the original movie. And but yeah, they cut to the kid in his jail cell. He's like walking around. Don't need any of that. They show a lot of flashback stuff to the war, or to like when he was a little kid, like him growing up. That stuff feels maybe a little more important, but it's not essential. You could probably get rid of it and it wouldn't hurt the movie. I suppose at least it feels more dramatically justified by you. Like, you understand what the filmmaker is trying to do with that stuff, as opposed to him pacing around his jail cell, which is just nothing.
Yeah, I did you understand the meaning behind we keep seeing this image of a dog carrying a human hand out of a war zone with a watch, and they keep stopping the footage before we see what we're seeing, and then at the end they reveal that it's a dog carrying a human hand with a watch.
It's not. It's actually a ring, but I don't know.
Is it a ring? Oh, that's right, it's a ring. It's a ring. I'm sorry, not a watch.
Like in all the previous scenes, they cut away, but you see it glinting. But then it's only at the very end that you see that it's a ring. And I admit,
I don't get
no idea what it means either.
I kept on trying to think of something like they were going to describe an object that was lost, and I don't remember that ever happening. Anyway, yeah, I could do without it being this long, and I am uncomfortable with the politics of the director. But if you're a big fan of 12 Angry Men and you have 2 hours and 40 minutes to spare, give it a shot. I think this was also at least considered for best foreign film. I don't think it was actually nominated. I think it was sent.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just to circle back around to the beginning, I just think that the main thing that the movie is worth watching for is the same principles as the original. Just an opportunity to watch a lot of actors really dig into their characters.
The second movie that Tyler and I agreed to kind of watch at the last minute here, that I just watched yesterday, was Connected, which is a Chinese. It's actually a Hong Kong version of Cellular from the 2004 movie by David Ellis. It is a Hong Kong movie, and I believe Noodle Shop is a Chinese mainland movie. So I'm not breaking my one movie per country rule in this instance. I might be wrong there, though, but I'm pretty sure Noodle Shop was made in mainland China with a mainland Chinese crew.
It is sort of interesting, before you get into the bulk of this movie, one of the things that made me think of doing this particular episode is, it was a little while ago. I had sort of noticed already, but I learned that it was sort of quote unquote a thing, which is Sony Pictures in particular. The one that they're really doing a lot of is they decided to just take My Best Friend's Wedding and they just farm it out to other countries. So there's Chinese My Best Friend's Wedding, there's a Spanish My Best Friend's Wedding, there's I think a Turkish My Best Friend's Wedding, there may be a Russian one as well, and they have also done this at least once with 51st Dates, because there is a Spanish language 51st Dates. And then you found out that this is another one that Warner Brothers has done in several countries as well.
Yeah, so this is I should say directed by Benny Chan. We'll go on to him in a minute, but directed by Benny Chan, released in 2008. If like me, you forgot the movie Cellular even existed, or like me, vaguely remembered Larry Cohen had written a story treatment and had it confused with his other phone movie, Phone Booth. Yeah, this is a vapor movie that features performances from people who are now famous, much more famous. It's a pretty early American Jason Statham. It has Avatar dude as a thug, as like Thug A. I don't think he has a name.
And of course, the big draw is in the lead. We have Chris Evans, and so, and then David Ellis is director of Final Destination 2. So it had a little bit of that, but what's funny here is Larry Cohen's
Larry Cohen. Larry Cohen's a big deal. I love Larry Cohen. So
then for me, just as a personal note, his treatment that was actually written into his screenplay by Chris Morgan, who went on to write Fast and the Furious 3 through I think 7.
But anyway, so for whatever reason, New Line Cinema put this out. Maybe what Tyler said about farming it out. This was either farmed out or a huge cultural moment around the world, because there are 4 foreign remakes of this movie released within a 3-year period. There's a 2007 Bollywood version called Speed. Apparently, there's no Bollywood remake of the Jan de Bont movie Speed. There's a 2007 Malaysian movie called Hello. There is a 2009 Tollywood remake called Risk, and there's this 2008 Hong Kong remake called Connected. And when you see the movie, you understand that it is maybe the ideal thing to remake, because it is kind of generic, but has a good hook, and you can build a bunch of action scenes around it.
And
you,
I mean, minus the action scene part, I certainly see the exact same principle at work in My Best Friend's Wedding and 51st Dates.
yeah,
It makes perfect sense. Like you think
and
that there would be more of this.
they don't need to be expensive. You can go really big on your action in this case, or you can keep it small, and it really doesn't. I mean, this could be just foot chases instead of car chases, and it would still be basically the same idea. But Benny Chan is a pretty big deal. Was a pretty big deal. Hong Kong director. He worked with Jackie Chan in some of his early millennial, late '90s movies that aren't very good. He made a big budget action drama called Shaolin with Andy Lau, and then sort of post Infernal Affairs, there was this kind of rush of cop dramas, and he sort of slid into that and making Hong Kong, and he making Hong Kong cop dramas and getting loads and loads of nominations for Hong Kong Film Awards. He finally won posthumously in 2021 for Raging Fire. He died of cancer in 2020, and in a tragic coincidence, David Ellis also died at a pretty young age back in 2013, and they don't actually know what he died of exactly. It's never been released, but these are both guys that were, David Ellis, just to not get into it too much, but Final Destination 2, he was a stunt guy and second unit guy, and Final Destination 2 was a hit and everybody loved it, and then he made this and everybody was like, sure, this is fine, and then he made Snakes on a Plane, and it was a really high profile flop, because it was one of those early viral marketing things that then it was Morbius. It was the Morbius of its day, where it had huge viral word of mouth, and then no one actually went and saw it.
The only thing is, I think people actually, for better or worse, they like Snakes on a Plane.
And then he his career kind of dies after that, and he made a couple not great movies. I've seen he did Final Destination 4, which I think most people agree is the worst Final Destination movie.
I certainly think so.
And then he made Shark Night, which is a genuinely not good. That was his last movie. It was bad. I watched it kind of excitedly back in the day, and it was just no good. So he had kind of a tragic career. So there's something kind of funny about Benny Chan, this very celebrated director, making something from this guy who is really a second unit guy. Anyway, it's not a very good. Cellular isn't a very good movie, but it is very crisp and likable and tight knit. And it's got some really good basic performances. It's the thing is that it's sort of a comedy. It always feels a little, even during its suspenseful moments, it feels silly.
Yeah,
in a very early 2000s way.
I think if there's anything that really, because I've watched Cellular a couple of times. I saw it closer to when it was new, and I saw it somewhat recently. And both times I walked away thinking, I want this to be better than it is. Like, it feels like it should be the basis for a really solid little dumb thriller, but it just doesn't quite get.
It should be more like Phone Booth, which people really like.
I mean, or in my case, I thought Connected was basically the movie that I wanted.
Yeah, and Connected is not just by a different kind of filmmaker, but it is a much more serious movie. It's a longer movie, but not twice the length of the original.
I would say that this one, more than 12 for me, felt like it's probably, you could probably find 20 minutes in it somewhere and just pare it down a little bit, but I still thought it was good. And
it leaves some room to breathe in a couple spots, especially the very beginning. The Cellular starts so fast that it's sort of funny. This one gives a little bit of an intro.
The good thing about this one being long, though, or the saving grace, is that it does kind of save some of the best stuff, in my opinion, for last. I really liked the ending. It's been a while since I've seen Cellular, and I cannot remember how it ends, but I don't think it ends like this movie. I could be wrong.
No, it's well, okay. I wrote this one since I didn't have a lot to say on either movie as far as how good they were, because I think they were both very efficient thrillers, and one was just better than the other one. I made a little list of the character changes that I thought were interesting. So the Kim Basinger plays the mother in the original. People maybe haven't seen this. I should say the plot is a woman is kidnapped, and her kidnappers are telling her, we need to know where something is, and she has no idea what they're talking about. She finds a phone that is broken and dials a random number on it. It turns out it's this random guy's cell phone, and he decides to believe her and try to help her And he keeps getting into wackier and wackier situations while he's trying to save her kid and her husband and so on.
And I think
So
I think the first thing that you're going to mention that I thought was quite funny is that they went to the long effort of making this new woman, the woman in this movie, making her like an engineer basically, so that there was an explanation for how she fixes the phone. I don't remember that being the case.
no, she's just a lady. And I mean, she we have no, there's even a part in Cellular where she says, we're not rich. I don't know. And it's like, we saw your house at the beginning of the movie. You live in LA. You're definitely rich, Kim Basinger. But, and also her husband's like, he's a nobody. He's a realtor. It's like realtors make quite a bit of it. But yeah, Barbie Hisu. I'm not sure if you pronounce Cantonese names. It's HSU. I think it's Sue. Their characters are similar at its base, but there's an age difference. They younged her up a bit, and she's actually a widow, and the man involved that she's trying to get this guy to rescue is her brother rather than her husband.
Yep.
And I suspected immediately why they made this change. And sure enough, it gets to the end of the movie, and that's why they did it. It's because they wanted there to be a possibility for a romance at the end with her and the hero, whereas in the Chris Evans and Kim Basinger definitely have a mutual respect hug at the end.
In this case, I almost actually kind of like it because just so many of these things are about, because this guy has I don't know if they're fully divorced or if they're just estranged or whatever, but he has a kid, and the woman that he was with, like they're not together anymore. And I guess I kind of like the idea that the movie does not end with them getting back together.
Yeah, well, and so the Chris Evans, Louis Koo plays the Chris Evans character, and they're morally similar guys. They're both really straight line, nice dudes who are doing the right thing. But Chris Evans' character is just an aimless college stage guy who we literally know nothing about other than he still loves his ex-girlfriend and is trying to do things to impress her. That's the only character development we get on him. And he has a really gross friend who makes really weird sexual advances at girls on the boardwalk.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
And so Koo has a family, and he actually works a really bad job as a debt collector, and he witnesses violence every day because he works for shitty people who beat the crap out of people who owe them money.
That was a thing that kind of confused me because I was like, is he a mob? Like, because I mean,
I had to look it up. I wasn't sure what his thing was, but he's a debt collector, so it might be mob related because it might be for gambling debts. It's not clear. But he is not a gangster himself, at the very least. And he does not like it. But he has every reason to just walk away from the situation, whereas Evans is not much else going on in his life, and he might as well go for it. Whereas this guy's like, well, he has to go to the airport to meet his estranged wife, and I think they are fully divorced.
Okay.
And that's why the kid's about to leave with his mom, is because they're going to go somewhere else together for the time being. And so I think that the kid, he's about to have a long distance shared custody is what's happening. But so he has all these reasons he has to get to the airport to see his kid because it's a real big deal if he misses it. Whereas there's no reason anybody gives a shit about Chris Evans getting back to his friend who's stuck doing the saved whales stuff. Like, and it's totally pointless. They might as well not even have that. They might as well just have a scene where Chris Evans is just driving and answers the phone. We need zero backstory for Chris Evans' version of the character. And then the other change they make that I don't like as much is that in the original movie, William H. Macy is the good cop. I should say this is a movie where the twist is the cops are the bad guys. And William H. Macy is this good cop who is retiring early, and he's going to start a boutique, a beauty boutique with his wife. And he's a little bit, as they say in the movie, because the language, they refer to him as pussy whipped, but he genuinely seems to be interested in the idea of retiring and stuff. There's cute scenes.
I thought you were going to say interested in his wife, which is just a
no. He is. He clearly loves his wife, and he wants to do this business. He's he's not henpecked. They joke about him being henpecked, and he's clearly not. But the genius of his casting is that he is not miscast. This is not putting William H. Macy in an action role. This is typecasting William H. Macy and then throwing him into an action role. So it's somehow really charming and believable to have this cop just keep like trying to avoid the situation, but then have niggling doubts and then end up stuck deeper because when the twist happens that even his friend is in on this, the other cop is in on this, it sort of hurts a little bit more, and it is more meaningful for him to turn on his cop buddies, whereas the Nick Chung character is a sort of low life that nobody really appreciates. And he also really loves his wife, and they're just having a good time shopping. I can't remember if they say that they're starting a business, but when it's revealed that the cops are in on it, which in this movie's defense, I think Cellular does a better job by not revealing that all the cops are in on it until the end of the movie. In Cellular, they reveal it really early on, like halfway through, that even the quote good cops are in on it.
You said that Cellular twice. I think you Connected.
I'm sorry, Connected. Yes, Connected. They don't reveal it until almost the very end of the movie.
And I hadn't seen Cellular recently enough to remember that they because the Connected cop has a friend, and you see him throughout the whole movie. And I didn't realize he was going to turn on him and turn out to be
right. And in Cellular, that friend is revealed very early on as being part of it. It's actually when they watch the video for the first time, because the whole plot hinges on somebody has accidentally recorded these cops murdering gang lord or drug lords and taking their goods. And for a minute, I thought that they were going to totally change the reason. I didn't think they were going to reuse that, and I was like, and it would be more believable to not have a video of cops killing people be the one thing cops are doing anything to get back. It's in the real world, they would release the video and say, and then put them on disciplinary leave or something. I don't know.
Paid disciplinary leave.
Paid, yeah. And then the equivalent to Jason Statham is Liu Yi. And I think he's way better than Statham. I think Statham is uncomfortable in the role because Statham is playing a despicable person, but he undersells it so much that you're like you don't really root for them to murder him. Whereas Yi plays this almost over the top, maniacally evil piece of shit. Like he's like a Takashi Miike villain with his bleached hair.
Delightfully, just delightful. He's got the look down too. He's got the turtleneck and the dark shades and the hat. To go back to the director, I mean, I thought this movie had a lot of, I knew that he had worked with Jackie Chan, and you can see some of that stuff in here. Like there's a part where the main guy, he's got a car and he's like racing around, and he gets hooked on a construction site. So they do the classic thing where it's like this long, like sort of rope lattice, and there's a bunch of guys hanging off of it, and they're like being dragged behind the car and stuff like that. And there's a little bit of martial arts. Like later, this guy's being chased, and this guy like leaps off a hill onto the hood of his car. I thought that was really cool. And there's a fight in a house, and then a lot of martial arts at the end too.
There's some of the changes in scenes is that the original movie has the handoff, or they have the brother being picked up, or the husband being picked up at an airport. So there's an action scene at an airport much earlier on. They make that the brother is at a hospital, and that leads to the scene that Tyler just described with the hillside. And they save the airport for the end of the movie. They really seem to want, I suppose, because the original movie, the end is the Santa Monica Pier, which isn't really that large of an area, and they end up under the pier on very obvious sets doing the shootout. So it is the better choice to have an airport, especially in the mid 2000s when we still have airport anxiety all in our minds.
And of course, it also dovetails nicely with the idea that the kid is at the airport and he's got
right. Yeah, and that's a good scene, is that he has to choose between going and saying hi to his kid and continuing the charade of handing over this evidence to these villains in hopes of freeing these people, knowing that that's probably not going to work. The bad guys are definitely more dangerous. Like they kill people in Cellular, but it all feels like a silly movie, so none of it really hurts.
The bad guys are more dangerous, but the one thing that really pushes believability in this one is how dangerous the main guy is, because he causes so much collateral damage that I do not remember in Cellular. I feel like
in Cellular he mostly crashes into stuff. He doesn't really. It's not really that bad. The funniest the thing about Cellular is that there's this almost nihilistic sense of how much nobody wants to help Chris Evans. They just refuse to help him. Whereas in Cellular, it's just like everybody in this world is a little sadder, so it doesn't really feel. And so the scene where they have the exact same scene where he ends up basically having to steal a yuppie's car.
Mm-hmm.
And the original, the yuppie is just an absolute piece of shit. And in the remake, it's Vincent Koch who most people recognize from Stephen Chow movies, and it's really funny because I have to watch Jackie Chan's Gorgeous for review, and he directed Gorgeous. And instead, the lady has to think fast to keep him on the phone so that he won't hang up and lose the signal while the hero is chasing his car. So she's like, "You just won a prize." Whereas in the other case, he just threatens the guy and takes his car. It's not as funny. So it's one case where this movie is funnier.
I did like that Louis Koo pulls out the gun and the guy just like gestures. He's like, "I should get out now."
Yeah, the cell phone scene is really like maddening in the original because it's a grand opening and everybody keeps passing him off and saying there's a line or I'm on my break, and that's like the really nihilistic, like the whole world is out to not help you with anything. Whereas in Connected, it's like there's just one guy who's being kind of a putz and not getting.
He's busy hitting on another employee.
Yeah, it's much lower state. It feels much less like the entire world is out to get and not make things go right. But a lot of it plays out like the school scene is almost identical. Like it's just they've changed it from a boy to a girl, and it's obviously a different country. But I mean, the uniform idea and the fact that she can't describe what her child looks like because all the kids have the same everything. Not only do they wear uniforms, but the same stuff is popular with children.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that they took directly was the end credits are identical in the two movies, where they re-show scenes from the movie, and every time he looks at his phone, it's a credit.
Yeah, I saw that happening, and I was like, "Oh yeah, I remember them doing that."
Yeah, I mean, it's a better movie. I don't think either one's a great movie, but I am honestly kind of curious to watch the other three remakes to see what they do with it, because it seems like it's almost like a Mad Lib at this point, where you can just sort of how close are you going to stick to it? It's an interesting idea.
It's just like a solid B thriller that I enjoyed watching. It really satisfied me in the way that I wanted the original Cellular to satisfy me.
Well, here's my final question to you on this one:
Uh-huh.
what's the worst way to die? Having Kim Basinger sever your brachial artery with a knife so sharp that you don't even notice until you've mostly bled out, or have Barbie Sue throw a rusty nail down your throat that you just very slowly choke on while you're chasing her?
I also, in terms of random trivia, did you also notice the random thing that I noticed, which is that the composited gun in this person's hand behind their back that just totally
I
baffled
did.
me.
And it was there in the. I think they just forgot to shoot it. Is what happened, because it's in the original. It's important that the lady who's staying at the house is not the right woman and she has the wrong accent, but that she has a gun behind her back the whole time she's talking to the William H. Macy character. So then we'll go back to I messed up when I said that Cellular wasn't next. So what's actually next now is a woman, a gun, and a noodle shop, which sometimes is called a simple noodle story.
This was my suggestion, mainly because this is a rare case where I love the original and I love the remake. Blood Simple is one of my favorite Coen Brothers movies, and I just really, when I saw A Woman, a Gun, and a Noodle Shop in theaters, that wasn't the case. I had seen Blood Simple, but I didn't love it like I do now, and so after many years, I watched it again, having seen Blood Simple many times, and I just really, really liked it.
My possibly controversial take is that I think Blood Simple is a very good first film, but it's not really high on my favorite Coen Brothers list. But I do like it a little more every time I see it. This one I also rewatched just because it had been so long. I'm guessing this is the fourth or fifth time I've seen it, and I like it a little bit more each time. You'd think I would like it more because it's a very American giallo kind of thing going on in it. So I don't know what my problem is, honestly.
I mean, it falls into a certain subgenre of first time filmmakers making a tight little film noir, and I just think if that's what you're going for, this is like the ideal version of it. This is
Yeah,
exactly what I want. Like all the characters of Blood Simple just fit in like really well, and the twists and turns, they all make sense, and I just think it's really, really precision filmmaking in that sense.
you could set your watch to it.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me is that there's nothing about Zhang Yimou's career up to that point to say that he would want to remake Blood Simple, let alone remake Blood Simple as a period piece, and not just the same movie but in Hong Kong or Beijing or Shanghai in like the modern day, or at least the 80s.
Mm-hmm.
I think that that's a really random left field thing for him. There is a very long history of Hong Kong and Chinese B movies that are variations on American films. They don't often remake them directly, but there's a lot of movies that are basically ripoffs, and they love, the Shaw brothers love just stealing audio from other movies, like especially spaghetti westerns. It's always kind of a fun thing. Again, I would say that Zhang Yimou is not a B filmmaker. He might be top 3 blockbuster filmmakers in contemporary Chinese cinema. You don't get a lot bigger than him, and he is eclectic. Even if you don't recognize his name, you've seen or heard of some of his movies. Raise the Red Lantern, Happy Times, Hero. A lot of people have seen Hero.
Mm-hmm.
House of Flying Daggers. He kind of made Hero, House of Flying Daggers, and the weakest of those was Curse of the Golden Flower. These increasingly gigantic kung fu wushu epics, period epics. And then when he got to the end of them, they're just like bigger and bigger and bigger. Like to the point that Curse of the Golden Flower has these just endless action set pieces at the end that just go on and on and on, and so many people are dying, and there's so many extras, and there's so many costumes. And he sort of like went the opposite direction by remaking the Coen brothers' smallest movie, and then setting it, he's still setting it in a similar time period, but just like it's such a comedy. It's almost in a lot of places it feels like the kind of thing Stephen Chow was doing. This came out in 2009, so Stephen Chow's big breakouts would have been Shaolin Soccer in '99. That was like an international hit.
Well, and
So
Kung
we're
Fu Hustle would have been out by then.
yeah, and Kung Fu Hustle I think was 2004. I want to say, which was another international hit. So he's kind of I haven't seen enough of his movies to know if he made a lot of other comedies.
And actually, other than Raise the Red Lantern, which I saw after this, I think those are the only 2 Yimou films I've seen.
Yeah, and Razor and Lantern is definitely not a comedy.
Yeah, it's nothing. Yeah, it's just totally. You would never guess just seeing the 2 movies that they were made by the same filmmaker.
Yeah. I mean, this one you could see that it's made by it's very colorful in the same way. And there's one scene where instead of like in Blood Simple, where it's a bar, it's a noodle shop, and so there is one sort of kung fu noodle making scene that feels like something out of Hero or House of Flying Daggers, but otherwise it's just not that much to make you assume. And in fact, the first 15 minutes, if I didn't know, maybe even 30 minutes, if I didn't know it was a remake of Blood Simple, I don't know if I would have figured it out until the point where the sort of hitman who's a cop in this kills the husband. But up until that point, I don't know if I would have figured out that this was a remake.
I'm gonna hit you with my two great insights. My big insight, and then a littler insight, both of which I just find very delightful. The last time I watched it, my big insight was he took a Coen Brothers drama and he turned it into a Coen Brothers comedy. I feel like the relationship between the wife and the husband is, I mean, it's like, or not the wife and the husband, the wife and the guy that she's sleeping with. The relationship between them is almost like Hi and his wife in Raising
Arizona, yeah.
They have the same sort of cartoon energy to them, and I just thought, what an interesting idea. Just because the Coen, I mean, it's funny that I was just thinking about this when I said the thing about Raise the Red Lantern. It's like you also wouldn't necessarily think that the same people made Raising Arizona and No Country for Old Men, so that sort of fits in that way, and I just think that there's a lot going on there. And the other thing that I really found delightful is that he took the Coen brothers, one of their most despicable and like greasy and weird characters, and was one of the most stoic, and he just flipped them. Like he reversed the way that the Dan Hedaya character kind of acts with the policeman, and he made the husband into the Emmett Walsh character. And I just thought,
Yeah, I guess I hadn't thought about that part because he definitely very obviously turned the policeman is sort of the antithesis of Emmett Walsh in that he has so much decorum.
and a little flourish that I think was intentional. There's a bunch of documentaries on the Blu-ray that I have never watched and I've always meant to. I'm really bad at watching extras now, but one of the little touches that I thought was brilliant is that they made his policeman outfit the color of the guy's VW Bug.
You know what I really liked was, and I don't know if it's historically accurate, but the sort of siren that the police have. That's
yeah.
Manual thing that they run with. I have a feeling that was just made up because this feels like a lot of the movie is not historically accurate. It really feels stylized. To go back to what you said about a Coen Brothers comedy, I think a lot of this, like they stretch the bartender becomes two separate characters, and they're cartoony too, but they also have a bit of a screwball thing, and the Coen Brothers. Hudsucker Proxy and I haven't seen it, but as I understand, Intolerable Cruelty are both kind of screwball throwbacks.
Oh yeah, Intolerable Cruelty especially, and I know that's not one of their more celebrated movies, but I do like it. I think I'm probably a little biased because that was my first Coen Brothers movie and my first press screening ever. But it was I do like that movie.
Yeah, see, my parents are not what I'd call movie people, but they really liked the Coen Brothers. So I saw Raising Arizona was one of my parents wouldn't even let me see PG movies for a lot of it, but they let me see Raising Arizona because they knew I'd get a kick out of it. So I think that was my first.
I do think it's also funny that these two characters they're trying to get paid, which I think only recently when we were talking about this episode, I was like, wow, they really did. Even though these characters are like there was the one guy in the other movie, but they really even took his motivation because he's also trying to get paid.
This I would say one thing these two movies have in common is that for a lot of them, the beginning of this one, this doesn't apply to, but for a lot of them, you don't need subtitles. They're both told visually. The beginning of Noodle Shop, you absolutely need subtitles. Even with subtitles, I was like, what is this? Because there's this whole long thing about her buying the gun. And it's like a whole silly funny bit, and I was confused as to what that had to do, but I figured it out by the end. I got the gist, but beyond that, they're both told almost exclusively with imagery, which is kind of a cool thing when you're talking about adapting movies from other languages. The idea of making a movie that doesn't really even need a language to tell it, I think but still be a very complex story. Yeah, I'm not 100% sure if I would have been able to follow exactly what was occurring when people are coming back and trying to break into the safe. If I hadn't just watched Blood Simple, I think I got a little confused on the area that they were in. But it was really fun to realize the way that they were changing Blood Simple, which takes place in Texas in the 80s, to I don't know what time period this was.
It's actually I believe I looked it up one of the times that I had just watched it, and it's like intentionally vague.
Yeah, it's not a real place, and like the costumes aren't real. Actually, you know what it reminded me of is that there was a very weird short period where spaghetti western aesthetics were sort of chic in Asian film. There was Kim Ji-woon made The Good, the Bad, and the Weird.
Yeah.
And Takashi Miike made Sukiyaki Western Django.
Yeah.
Those are not really remakes of Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Django. And they aren't even really spaghetti Western-esque, but they take ideas from them and they look similar even though they're from different countries. And I feel like this actually came out right before those. So it was like those three movies would make a good triple feature just for aesthetics. Just this sort
There's
of
another one that feels like it might connect to this one. I can't remember what it's called now, but I think it's like I think it's a Chinese movie, and I think it's a Western, and I think it has like really amped colors. I remember having it on DVD from Magnolia, but I can't remember.
I think is it a Bengali movie called Curse of the Black Tiger?
Oh, that might be it.
Tears of the Black Tiger, yeah. Is that
Yes, I think that's the one I'm thinking of. Yeah, I guess I was
I
wrong about the country, but
yeah, that came out in 2000. It says 2007 USA release date. So yeah, it took it a while. But yeah, that fits too. Like, it's a Thailand. It was made in Thailand, not Bengal. What was I saying? The disposal of bodies, I liked that stuff. I liked the fact that they worked the lighter into it. Even though there weren't lighters in this nebulous time period, they have to have it as a specific flintstone. I liked that a lot. And I was really spending most of the movie trying to figure out how they were going to work. Because to me, the Blood Simple all boils down to that last scene where she crawls out the window into a different window and he reaches around and she stabs his hand into the window pane so he can't get it out. And he has to punch holes in the wall.
it
Is
has that
such
brilliant visual of him firing the bullets into the dark room from the bright room and the shafts of light coming through the wall.
With that scene in mind, I spent a lot of the movie just waiting for that scene to happen. And so they do it with swords and a wall, like a door instead of a window.
I know that one of the Coens, I think it was Joel, he saw this movie and he was very enthusiastic about it.
Good.
I just on a very personal note, I wrote that I collect autographs and Emmett Walsh is somebody who signs through the mail, so I wrote him a letter and I asked him if he'd seen this and he said no. So
too bad.
Apparently he gives this to people that he works with. He sent one to me in the reply. It's a 1-page printout of his entire resume.
That's so cute.
He also sent me a smashed penny and a trading card of his character from Wild Wild West.
He must have a big bucket of them. So, okay, well, I think that we can wrap this up then.
Yeah.
The last one is Unforgiven, and I'm going to do my best with the Japanese title, Yurusarezaru Mano. But it's just Unforgiven. They just called it Unforgiven. 2013, based on the Clint Eastwood movie from 92. It's going to guess 3.
I think of all the movies that we've covered on this podcast, I think this one makes the most pointed and probably dramatically useful changes to localize the story. Because I think the original Unforgiven is it's talked about as this legendary Western, and I don't, not to step on anybody's toes or rain on anybody's parade, but it's never really done it for me. I mean, I love the Dollars trilogy and stuff like that, but the people who say that like this feels like an epilogue to that, I don't really get it. But the way the movie goes about, it is sort of unpacking Western tropes, but it feels very generalized in the sense that it's not really the myth of the American West so much, even though it is, because Westerns are a uniquely American kind of thing. But it just feels like it could be applied to anybody who has a violent past. Like the things that the Clint Eastwood character regrets are not uniquely American in any way, really. And I feel like I found it very interesting to see all the political and cultural stuff that they weaved into this Unforgiven rewatching it.
Well, and I should say, as a Western fan, I used to love Unforgiven. I think it was like, unassailable masterpiece. And apparently this was sort of controversial when this movie was first announced, that people like, how dare you remake Unforgiven? But it was a formative movie for me. But the more years that gone by, the more Westerns I watched, it really just feels like a 90s variation of a revisionist West. It's baby's first revisionist Western, and that's fine. It's not a bad movie by any means, but and it's a great entry point. But hopefully if people watch Unforgiven and like it, they'll go back and watch black and white movies from the 50s and some of the spaghetti westerns from the 60s and to understand what that Eastwood wasn't the first one getting to this spot. He was just bringing it to audiences that, the Western was famously basically dead in the 80s and 90s. They kept on making Westerns and they would flop. It was like a big thing, like no one wants to see Westerns anymore. So the fact that this came out and had something to say about Westerns, even if it wasn't actually new, it felt fresh. And the fact that a director known for starring in Westerns made it was also a big deal. I guess that's the one thing that it has that the Japanese version doesn't, is it wasn't made by a guy who used to make samurai movie and star. Like it wasn't like Toshiro Mifune lived until the year 2013 and decided to make Unforgiven about a samurai and star in it. That would have felt more one-to-one. But yeah, I'm so that's to mostly agree with you. I think that the original is a good movie, but that it has been overappreciated by people who don't necessarily like Westerns usually, which is fine. Nobody has to like Westerns. It's like whatever you want. Well, I should start by saying Japan, unlike a lot of these other countries, doesn't seem as interested in cashing in on Hollywood trends to me. There's a periods in post-war Japan where they're making a lot of movies that are utilizing Western's a bad word, but like Hollywood and European stuff. So you have a lot of juvenile delinquent movies with kids that are, trying to look like greasers. But they're movies they're not remakes of American movies set in Japan. They're movies about Japanese youth that happens to like rock and roll music. And I think that they have their own trends that they get stuck on, like kaiju movies and Yakuza movies, and of course samurai movies, that they just don't have as much of an interest. So when they do remake an American movie, it's usually a pretty big deal. That's why one of the reasons why I was really not interested in covering Sideways, which was another Japanese one you suggested. First of all, because I kind of hate the original movie, but also because I just couldn't see where they were going to go that would be interesting to me. It would just have felt like Sideways in Japan instead. Whereas something like Three Godfathers totally changes the story. To Tokyo Godfathers totally changes the story and even the medium it's told in. We almost covered that one too.
And of course, obviously, this plays into a long history of the bridge between Western and samurai movies. With like Magnificent Seven being the most obvious example.
Right. So you have Magnificent Seven remaking Seven Samurai, and then you have Clint Eastwood's first hit, Fistful of Dollars, is an Italian remake of Kurosawa's Yojimbo. And actually that Yojimbo becomes the basis of, because Fistful of Dollars is such a hit, becomes the basis of like I shouldn't say most, but a lot of spaghetti westerns are that whole new guy comes into town and plays the two sides of town against each other. So the fact that Eastwood has this thing going back to samurai movies, and then someone else takes an Eastwood western that's sort of about his old spaghetti westerns and brings it back to samurai movies, is a very cool, interesting idea just on the face of itself.
And of course, this is after Eastwood himself made Sands of Iwo Jima with Ken Watanabe. So
that's right. I forgot. I totally forgot about that. I thought you were going to say this is after Eastwood made Gran Torino and totally fucked up the idea of portraying an Asian culture. We almost had the thing here where you were like, maybe we can count this as a Korean movie. It was directed by a Korean-born filmmaker, Lee Sang-il, but from what I understand, he's only ever directed films in Japan. He's just of Korean descent.
I think my Japanese friend Martin seemed to know something about it, but I didn't get a chance to ask him about it. Okay. That it is somehow significant that there are maybe multiple people who are Korean born, but they direct Japanese movies.
I mean, there's definitely Korean and Japanese stars that go between the two countries. But for me, the other really, really interesting thing about this movie is that in my brain, I think samurai, and I think very old story. But the samurais existed for just a huge swath of time. These movies basically take place at the same time, just on different sides of the globe. And that's fascinating to me. So like Unforgiven, I think specifically says that it's 1881. And this one specifically says 1880 at the beginning, but I think a lot of time goes by, so it might be the exact same year.
I think when the main plot starts, it says 1883. I could.
Oh, does it? Okay, I thought I wrote down 1880, but that might just be wrong. But it's the Meiji era, and it goes through.
Well, I think you said the prologue, so I think I'm talking about after the prologue. They say 1883.
So very close in time then, and just like the idea that these stories could be occurring concurrently. is really cool to me, and it makes me, like you said, it's a broad enough idea for a story that it makes me want to know, like, what was happening in Bulgaria in the 1880s, what was happening in Korea, what was happening in China, what was happening in Brazil, like what do all these countries and cultures, what is their equivalent to the Wild West, and what is their equivalent to a bounty hunter. It's just like I could see this being an ongoing thing, and it would be really cool, I think, if you just kept on every other, Warner Brothers did what you said at the beginning, handed this off and farmed it out, and just let every country that wanted to make a version of it. And the only thing they had to do is make it take place in 1880.
But yeah, like I said at the beginning, I mean, it feels like the movie really draws on who the samurai were, and like what they did and what they represented in that time period, and that's really weaved into the regrets that the characters have in an interesting way that I feel adds a lot of richness to the story. And certainly more important, even if I don't fully understand it as an American, certainly feels like it's adding a lot of cultural specificity that is fascinating.
It's an interesting idea to approach it both as I think they are both sort of deconstructing a mythical version of these things, because I don't think real cowboys had a lot in common with real samurai. They were on opposite sides of the law for the most part.
Sure.
One was a lord, the other one was probably basically homeless. But the idea that they are characters in these sort of oft-told dramas that just exist in their respective countries is interesting.
I mean, in fact, that's a big point, of, as far from what I could understand watching the movie, it's like that they enacted the political will of, people in power. That was a
Right.
big element to their guilt, that they were like, that it was maybe, I don't know if class struggle is quite the right thing to say, but like it feels like that's an element of it. And then there's this whole thing about two different, I don't know if they're what exactly they are. Two different cultures, the Ainu and I think the Wa, and and there's this the gunslinger kid. I wasn't quite sure, but I felt like there was an implication that he was the child of rape, that he was like the product of an Ainu woman and a Wa soldier, and he resented the Wa half of his lineage.
Well, and that to me is the most interesting change of all of them, because it's taking a Western trope of a half breed.
Mm.
And one thing Unforgiven doesn't touch is Native Americans.
Mm.
And so this other movie is taking a Western trope that is sometimes a very racist thing to put into a Western, but sometimes it is a point of entry for the audience to understand. And half breeds are disrespected. It's a very common thing to happen. They're doing their best to take the cowboys and Indians idea of a half breed and put it into a samurai movie, which I just think is really interesting and almost shows more understanding of Westerns than the Eastwood version has.
Some other changes that I thought were interesting is that they removed the wife of the basically the character that Morgan Freeman played in the original. So he has a little less, his arc is a little less sympathetic or tragic or whatever, because he seems like, I mean, the Morgan Freeman character seems very wholesome in a way, and this the character in the remake definitely feels broken in a similar way to the Eastwood character, like
Right.
that he has, and then like he fakes this whole dream about how he's going to fund the railroad and stuff, and that turns out to be something he made up, and he's just like, I just found that really fascinating. And then the other thing that really struck me is that even though the character that represents the one that Gene Hackman played in the original movie, like even though this character is still villainous, he feels a little less, a little more passive, sort of. Like he feels like he's a piece of shit still, but he's mostly just doing his job. And it doesn't feel like he has this hard on to like, because the Gene Hackman character really feels like he's picking on Eastwood and Freeman at a certain point.
Well, and also that it's a little Hackman character is more brutal towards the Richard Harris character.
Yes.
In this version, he mostly just wants him to leave town. In that version, he's definitely humiliating him as much as possible. And he's very interested in this writer character writing his story instead, where there's a little bit more indication in the Japanese version that he's just like, oh yeah, sure, I guess so. Like he's not he's
on the
not
ego trip.
yeah, he's not as much of an ego trip. But I mean, that is one of the that character is one of the more clever things about the original movie, I think, is that they have a guy who's literally writing stories about what's happening, but he's embellishing the truth and going to the wrong people, and then realizes this is the real West, is this brutal dickhead. I think that is one of the. I mean, I wonder if Eastwood even realizes he made a movie where the cops are the absolute worst people in the world. But
I mean, what I was going to say though, in this case, what I think is interesting is I feel like making that character into such a villain in the original, I feel like it's sort of, for me, it unbalances the movie a little bit, because it's like, I never had, when I watched the original, I never quite get a grasp on what I'm supposed to feel about the journey that the Eastwood character is on. And I feel like it is much more clear, like the tragedy and the backslide is a lot more straightforward in the Japanese version. And I think that it helps this character is not so directly antagonistic to the Ken Watanabe character, because that brings a little bit more focus to how the Ken Watanabe character in particular is like basically losing his soul or whatever. He's turning back into the person that he thought he had let go.
The other thing that this one adds, that I think really helps with that is there's some flashbacks. The Eastwood version never shows us what he used to be, and he's a lot of what the Eastwood character is going through has to be in his performance, and Clint Eastwood isn't exactly a nuanced performer. he's I mean, it's always been a problem in a lot of his movies, is that he's very good at one thing, and he's vulnerable in Unforgiven, but I think Watanabe is a much more nuanced and talented actor who can show more shades of vulnerability. Yes. And that when we really understand, even though it's left kind of open-ended, when we really understand where he's coming from in the flashbacks, I think that they add something to it. I like the idea of the flashbacks sort of haunting him. They're not just bad memories, and that like the more he falls back into his old ways, the more clear the flashbacks sort of become to him. Mm-hmm. Like he's being chased by this dark evil that's in his soul. Kind of, I really like that idea. I think that's good. And I mean, later on, there's another flashback to when the prostitute was attacked that I don't think is necessary, but in general, this is a more brutal movie than the Eastwood movie. Mm-hmm. In part because the guns are different and they use a lot of swords and knives. Just not as many. The guns aren't necessarily as big a part of samurai culture as cowboy culture.
I thought in that regard it was interesting that in the Eastwood version, the younger gunslinger, it's the same thing where he's revealed he hasn't killed anybody, and this guy he kills is his first kill. But it's a lot harder for him in this one.
Yeah, he just shoots. Yeah, in the original one, and Schofield Kid is pretty much annoying the entire movie, which is, in retrospect, a big problem. But yeah, he just shoots the guy on the toilet. Where Goro, I think, Goro has to like really fight him, and this drag out horrible knife fight.
And also in terms of the overall arc that I liked, I also think this one just has a better ending. I find it so that it's always stuck out to me as strange that the end of Unforgiven is that, because he just goes back, right?
He just goes back, and he moved to a different state. He moved to San Francisco.
He got over it. Like he slides back in, and then he's just like, okay, that's it.
Yeah, and it's all text on the screen, and it could have just been left ambiguous. They didn't have to put that text on the screen.
But I really like the way that this one did.
Yes, because it's not clear what happens, but that's kind of why it's good. I mean, he's probably dead. He's either dead or he's like gone feral again, and is like just out in the, because that's another thing. In the flashbacks, he looks feral. Like he looks fucked up. He doesn't look like the man with no name, or he doesn't look like Yojimbo. He doesn't look cool. He looks.
And the only other note that I wrote down is that the remake is missing one of my favorite little details from the original, but the scene that they have in this one, that's the same scene, is still also one of the best scenes in the movie for me, which is the after the Clint Eastwood / Ken Watanabe character first encounters the Wild Bill character, gets beat up. They've taken him to this little hut and he's healing up. And there's a scene between him and the prostitute who's been cut up. The detail that I liked in the Eastwood one is the fact that he feels a connection to her because they've both been wounded and they both look like shit. And there's a sort of emotional element to that I think is really good. But in this one, the sex worker, she's like, this is what my dad looked like when I last saw him. And then the scene ends with him because she's talking about the way he's hunched over. And then the scene ends with that, going back to that. And I just feel like it carries a lot of meaning in just visual storytelling. They don't call attention to it, but I thought it was really good.
Yeah, I mean, it is otherwise very, very close beat for beat. Even some of the dialogue's exactly the same, assuming the subtitles are accurate, which I'm guessing it was because it was like a real release that we watched. I mean,
although I will say that I went into this thinking that it was one of those ones that was very similar. I actually came away thinking that they were more distinct than I remember, even though the director does borrow a lot of the framing and there's a lot of things that look the same and the story, a lot of the same scenes in it. I do feel like they were actually more different. They had more variations than I had remembered.
Yeah. Well, it's the same story beats, but different context to them, maybe is the way to put it.
And I think in some ways that's the ideal thing that you would get out of one of these remakes.
Yeah. So I think I might like this one a little bit more than Eastwood. I mean, at this point in my life, I definitely like it more. I don't know. Maybe I'll go back and watch the Eastwood one someday and change my mind. But
since I've always had hesitations about the Eastwood one, it's not that hard for me to say that I like it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and if I'm going to watch a Western, I'm probably going to watch some shitty Italian-made one that I've never seen before, just to have another one under my belt anyway. So,
since I remembered them being more similar, I think I felt the gap between them was a little smaller. But upon revisiting and finding them more different than I remembered, probably because I know the Eastwood one a little bit better now, the distance between them grew a little bit.
All right, so do you want to tell the listeners how to follow you and where you can be found?
I can be found on Twitter at Tyler Gill Foster, TYLERGILFOSTER. I used to write for DVD Talk. I mean, as of right now, DVD Talk and all the reviews that I wrote for DVD Talk still exist, but my understanding from the people who contributed to DVD Talk is that functioning of the site has started to fail, and if it fails, they're not going to fix it. So at some point, the entire database is going to disappear. But as of right now, it's still online.
All right, well, you can find me at the usual places on the Genre Grinder website, on the Genre Grinder Facebook page, at Genre Grinder on Twitter, at Gabe M as in Matthew Powers on Twitter, and we now have Genre Grinder Gabe as a Instagram. Until next time, wrap yourself in plastic grocery bags and go for a brisk run. It's good for you, for some reason. Bye-bye. You gotta say bye or they think you died.
Bye.
मंजिल न हो कोई हासिल न हो तो है बस नाम